What would you do if a barefoot kid with nothing but a blue handkerchief said he could make your daughter walk again, and then proved it? The air was thick with late summer heat, clinging to the sidewalks and the people moving along them like an invisible weight. On the corner of 5th and Monroe, life blurred into routine. Suits gliding from office towers, mothers dragging restless children, and street vendors shouting deals no one truly believed. It was a city that swallowed moments whole, where miracles were things of legend and charity was often reduced to spare change tossed without eye contact. Caleb was invisible in that world. No one looked at the boy with sun-darkened skin and a frayed t-shirt, his bare feet blackened by hot asphalt. His hands, though small, were rough, not from play, but from the kind of work no one asked about. A cardboard sign rested against the wall beside him, scrawled in uneven letters, "Hungry, but I can fix things." And he could. Things that should have stayed broken. Things no doctor, no machine, no prayer had managed to fix. Across the street, a black Rolls-Royce Ghost idled before the tall glass facade of one of the city's most exclusive private medical centers. The man stepping out was immediately recognizable to anyone who still paid attention to society pages or financial news. Victor Langston. A man whose fortune could silence boardrooms, whose decisions rippled across entire markets. A man with a face carved by command, and a heart most presumed long fossilized beneath boardrooms and bottom lines. In the back seat sat a girl, Lily. 8 years old, with pale skin that hadn't seen sunlight in over a year, and legs that hadn't carried her weight in just as long. A spinal injury, a rare and cruel complication, had severed the life she'd known. What remained was a silent child, a wisp of who she'd once been. Caleb saw them, not as a beggar sees a mark, not as a child begging for sympathy. He saw the fracture lines in Victor's armor, the hollow weight in his chest. He saw Lily, too, small, pale, her eyes dulled like a painting left too long in sunlight. Something in him stirred. He crossed the street in 3 quick steps. "Sir," Caleb said, voice dry but steady. Victor turned, instinctively brushing off the approach. His hand twitched toward his wallet, the universal signal for take your dollar and leave. But then the words cut through. "I can make your daughter walk again." It was so absurd, so perfectly irrational, that Victor froze. A moment suspended between 2 worlds, the sterile, ordered one he controlled, and whatever strange, wordless reality this boy carried. "What did you say?" Victor asked, voice a low growl. Caleb's eyes didn't waver. "I can fix her." A scoff escaped from Victor's driver. A valet turned, stifling a laugh. But Lily, still silent, still distant, turned her head toward the voice. Her eyes met Caleb's through the tinted glass, and for the first time in months, there was a flicker. Not a spark, not a blaze, just the faintest pulse of something that had long gone missing. Victor felt it like a crack inside his chest. He should have ignored it, should have waved the boy off and gone inside for another disappointing consult. But pride, that stubborn thing, made him stand his ground. "You have 1 minute," Victor said coldly. Caleb spoke without pleading, without selling hope. "I don't need your money, I don't need your time, just a chance. Let me lay my hands on her legs. If nothing happens, I leave. But if something changes, you listen." Victor stared, truly looking now, at the dirt, the thinness, the stubborn tilt of the boy's chin. There was no fear in those eyes, and something else. Something he hadn't seen since before Lily's legs stopped moving. Hope. It was ridiculous, a gamble, a moment of madness, and against every rule of sense, Victor Langston did something unthinkable. He nodded. "If this story moved you, don't keep it to yourself. Share it. Because somewhere tonight there's a Lily waiting for someone to believe she matters, and there's a Caleb with a blue handkerchief ready to carry that hope. Hit like, drop a comment, and let's turn these quiet stories into a movement." Victor Langston had not always been a man of ice and iron. There were years, forgotten now by most, when his name was synonymous with restless ambition and a smile that promised you could build the impossible. Before the boardrooms, before the mergers and hostile takeovers, there had been love in his life. A woman named Camille and a little girl named Lily. It was Camille who softened him, who made him stop on street corners to buy roses from old women with tired eyes, who insisted that no matter how large the empire grew, they would eat dinner at the same battered kitchen table in their Harlem walk-up apartment on Sundays, even after the first million, even after the penthouse and the estate outside Greenwich. When Camille died, an aneurysm, no warning, no mercy, something inside Victor didn't just break. It calcified. His work became his sanctuary, his daughter, his soul remaining tethered to meaning. Every night he made it home in time to read her stories, not because he loved fairy tales, but because it was what Camille would have done. When Lily laughed, he heard his wife's voice. When she cried, it hollowed him. Then came the accident. It was nothing dramatic. No fiery crash or devastating headline, just a fall. A simple, stupid fall from a tree in their own backyard. She was chasing the neighbor's cat, landed wrong. By the time Victor reached the hospital, the prognosis was delivered in terms colder than stock reports. Spinal trauma, incomplete paraplegia, limited chance of recovery. Victor destroyed the first 2 doctors who delivered that verdict, fired the head of the hospital's board, commissioned private neurologists from Europe, flew specialists in from Japan and Israel. Every one of them told him variations of the same thing: some things money cannot buy. But Victor didn't believe in such things. He built futures. He reshaped companies, moved entire markets. His world bent when he ordered it to. And yet, night after night, he watched his daughter stare at the ceiling of her high-rise bedroom, her legs unmoving, her spirit crumbling. The city's most expensive specialists were nothing compared to the miracle Victor craved. By the time Caleb approached him that day on the street, Victor was a man running on fumes and denial. His daughter's 8th birthday was a week away, and all she wanted was to dance again. Not presents, not parties, to dance. And he was powerless. So when the filthy boy with storm-dark eyes and dirt-caked nails spoke those impossible words, "I can make your daughter walk again," something inside Victor, long buried under grief and pride, flickered. For a moment, he remembered Camille. Remembered how she would have dropped to one knee and asked Caleb his name. How she would have offered him a sandwich and a blanket before believing in his impossible promise. Instead, Victor gave him 60 seconds. And the boy didn't beg, didn't plead. He spoke with the certainty of a man twice his age. Now inside the cavernous mansion Victor called home, a place where warmth had been replaced by polished marble and imported silence. The conversation replayed in Victor's head like a haunting tune he couldn't silence. He paced the living room, while Caleb sat, small and unimposing, on a low leather ottoman. The boy's hands rested on his knees, nails bitten, skin marked by city grime and old bruises. The staff hovered nearby, scandalized. His housekeeper, Della, a woman who'd known Victor since his reckless 20s, crossed herself every time she looked at the boy. The butler, Mr. Reynolds, muttered something about street urchins and security risks. But Lily was different. She sat on the sunroom chaise pale as milk, her long dark hair a curtain against the daylight. She hadn't spoken a full sentence in months, had barely reacted to the world outside her room. Yet now her eyes followed Caleb's every movement. Victor watched them both, chest tight with something he refused to name. "Your name?" Victor finally asked. "Caleb," the boy replied. "Where are your parents?" A shrug. "Don't have any." "Who told you you could do this?" Caleb looked up, and for the first time Victor felt it. The eerie calm in those eyes. It wasn't arrogance. It wasn't madness. It was faith. Not the kind you preached from pulpits, but something older, stranger. "I just can." Victor exhaled, running a hand over his face. Logic screamed to throw the boy out. Call child services. Tell himself this was grief making him see things. But then Lily spoke, her voice dry, raspy from disuse. Let him try. 3 words. 3 tiny words that shattered the sterile, mourning weight of that house. Victor's head snapped toward her. Della gasped audibly. Even the butler dropped his phone. Lily's lips trembled as she repeated it. Please. Victor Langston, conqueror of markets and master of deals, realized he no longer had the strength to say no. Okay, he whispered. It wasn't consent. It wasn't belief. It was the surrender of a man so desperate, even a fool's hope felt sacred. And Caleb? Caleb just nodded like he'd known it would happen all along. Caleb had always known he was different. Long before the streets became his shelter, before sleeping beneath freeway overpasses and waking to the cold hunger of winter mornings, there had been moments. Small, inexplicable things. A bird with a shattered wing fluttering back to flight after he cupped it in his palms. A mutt with a deep gash along its side that stopped bleeding, after Caleb whispered something only the wind seemed to hear. People called them coincidences, the kind of small mercies the desperate cling to. But Caleb knew better. He felt it. In his fingertips, in the bones of his hands, in the strange pressure that built behind his eyes when someone near him was in pain. It wasn't something he controlled, not entirely. It came in surges, waves, leaving him exhausted afterward like a tide pulling the shore away grain by grain. And with every year he spent on the streets, every day his stomach growled louder than his voice. Those moments of quiet, impossible repair became rarer. Not because the world didn't need them, but because it refused to see them. Except sometimes, rarely. A mother in the shelter whose baby wouldn't stop coughing until Caleb laid a hand on his tiny chest. The old man with swollen feet, who woke one morning able to walk to the park bench Caleb called home without his cane. The junkie girl whose veins had burned black with infection, and who left one morning with clear eyes, a tremble in her hand but color in her face. They whispered about him, the other runaways, the dealers, even the street preachers. The beggar boy with God's hands, the devil's child, the healer that doesn't charge a dime. Caleb didn't claim either. He only knew that when people hurt, his hands ached to touch them, which was why when he saw Lily through the glass of the Rolls-Royce that day, something inside him screamed, not in horror, not even pity, but in recognition. That kind of pain had a shape. It hovered around her like smoke. It clung to her skin and hid behind her eyes. Caleb could feel it, a terrible emptiness where the spark of something bright had once lived. And worse, a man who carried guilt like a second shadow. Victor Langston wore grief like a fine suit, tailored to fit so well he barely noticed its weight anymore. But Caleb saw it. He saw everything. Now, in that cavernous home where echoes bounced off marble and warmth had been long evicted, Caleb let his gaze settle on Lily. She sat in a wheelchair too large for her small frame. A bone-pale wisp of a girl whose eyes had seen more disappointment in a year than most would in a lifetime. Her legs rested motionless beneath a silk blanket, untouched by sun or soil for 13 months. Victor stood at the far edge of the room like a man unsure of his own courage. "Tell me what you're going to do," he demanded, though his voice lacked the sharpness it once held in boardrooms. Caleb glanced at the girl. "I'm going to ask her if she wants to feel her legs again." Victor's jaw clenched. "We've tried everything. Don't promise her what can't be given." "I don't promise," Caleb replied quietly. "I just ask." And he did. He knelt before Lily, his hands resting palm up on his thighs. There was no ceremony, no ancient chant. Just a boy and a girl, both discarded in different ways by a world too fast, too cruel. "Do you want to feel your legs again?" Caleb asked. Lily's lip trembled. A tear slipped down one cheek. "Yes," she whispered. And for the first time in months, Victor's heart broke, because he hadn't asked her that. Not in words, not directly. The doctors had spoken for her, the therapists, the nurses. He'd allowed them to talk around her, over her. Caleb reached forward, his fingertips barely brushing her bare ankles beneath the silk. The air in the room changed. Della felt it first, a prickle along her scalp, a warmth that had nothing to do with temperature. The butler dropped his phone again. Victor's stomach lurched, like standing on the edge of a great height. Caleb closed his eyes. He didn't see light, no great flash or divine apparition. What he felt was the broken line, the severed thread inside Lily's body, like a snapped wire in a machine no one could repair. His fingers tingled. The ache behind his eyes sharpened into a hot pulse. He focused, like coaxing a stubborn flame from damp kindling. And then, a flicker, so small it might have been imagined. But it wasn't. Lily gasped, her foot twitched. Victor saw it. Della saw it. Even the butler paled. It was a flutter, no bigger than the movement of a leaf in still air. But it was there. And it was enough. Enough for the world Victor Langston had built to tremble at its foundation. It would have been easier for Victor Langston to dismiss what he saw. A muscle spasm, a trick of the light, the desperate misinterpretation of a grieving father's eyes. Men like him didn't believe in miracles. They believed in contracts, in margins, in the certainty of figures that obeyed logic. But there it was, Lily's foot, the tiniest shift beneath the silk blanket. Not a phantom nerve twitch, but a conscious, visible movement. His daughter, motionless for over a year, had moved, and the boy still knelt there, face calm, hands steady. Della crossed herself again, tears streaming openly now. The butler muttered something about devils and left the room. Victor's hands were shaking. I need you out of my house, he rasped, even as his body betrayed him by staying rooted to the spot. This is madness. You can't stay. Caleb didn't flinch. He stood slowly, his thin frame dwarfed by the opulence around him. But there was no fear in him, just that strange, quiet certainty. I said it would start small, the boy answered, voice soft as a lullaby, rough as sandpaper. You can throw me out. It'll stop. Or you can let me finish. Victor's gaze flicked to Lily. Her small hand clutched at the armrest now, eyes wide, damp with unshed tears, but awake in a way he hadn't seen since before the accident. A sliver of color in her face. He wanted to say no. God, he wanted to deny this, to send the boy back to whatever alley he'd crawled from, and call it grief-induced madness. But the truth lay in his daughter's trembling fingers. What do you want? Victor asked, his voice breaking in ways he despised. Caleb's eyes met his, deep, unblinking, far older than his years. Nothing, no money, no reward, just time. Victor turned away, every instinct in his body at war. This went against every rule of reason, of pride. It was humiliating, exposing his weakness in front of staff, of strangers. Yet the man who built empires could feel something shifting, like a fault line beneath his feet. Against reason, against reputation, against the rules that had guided him for a lifetime. He nodded. Della, he croaked, prepare a room. The old woman's face crumpled. Sir? You heard me. His voice regained a thread of its old authority, though it was frayed at the edges. One of the guest suites, away from the east wing. No one speaks of this, to anyone. Della fled the room, hands pressed to her mouth. Caleb moved to Lily again, crouching beside the chair, one hand hovering near her foot but not quite touching. Tomorrow, he murmured to her. We'll try again. Lily managed the barest of smiles. It was crooked, hesitant, but alive. Victor watched, hating how his throat ached, how this filthy, nameless boy had done in minutes what a year of specialists and therapy and state-of-the-art equipment could not. Who are you? Victor asked, the question a threadbare whisper. Caleb didn't answer. Not then. That night word spread through the mansion like wildfire, though none dared say it aloud. The guards knew a street boy had been brought inside. The staff exchanged furtive glances, and in the servants' quarters, bets were quietly placed on how long it would take before Victor came to his senses. But behind the thick doors of Lily's room, there was no fear. The girl slept for the first time without medication, and in the chair beside her bed, Caleb watched. Victor couldn't sleep. He paced his office, whiskey untouched beside him, replaying every second. His rational mind clawed for explanations. The doctor in Boston said there could be residual spasms, reflexive movements. The leg might respond to certain pressures. But he had seen the look on Lily's face. It wasn't involuntary. He scrolled through his phone, looking up neurological case studies, outlier reports, ancient folklore he'd long discarded. He stumbled on stories about children in villages, old hands in deserts, nameless healers who left no records, rumors, superstition. But tonight, Victor Langston was a man with no defenses left. At 3:12 a.m., he made his decision. The boy would stay, not because Victor believed in miracles, but because, for the first time in his life, reason had failed him, and in its place was something terrifyingly fragile: hope. For 13 months, Lily Langston lived in a house filled with light and no warmth. The sun poured through floor-to-ceiling windows, reflecting off marble floors and expensive imported chandeliers, but it never touched her. Not really. After the accident, her world shrank to the dimensions of her bedroom, the connecting sunroom, and the 2 silent nurses paid to attend to her around the clock. The sounds of the city, the horns, the wind slicing through narrow streets, even the wail of sirens, faded into background noise, swallowed by thick glass and silence. Victor visited her, of course. Every evening, without fail, he would stand by her bedside, a figure more suited to a boardroom than a child's room, recounting meetings she didn't care about, new research trials, flights planned to Switzerland and Germany and Tokyo. He spoke at her, not to her. He was terrified of asking questions he couldn't bear the answers to. Are you scared? Do you hate me? Would you rather I stopped trying? She never answered. Not with words. Lily spoke with the set of her mouth. With the slow, almost imperceptible way she turned her face to the window while he spoke. In her quiet refusal to weep, even on nights when the pain gnawed at her like an old animal, dull and persistent. The staff whispered about it, how strange it was for a child not to cry. But Lily had learned, in those long months, that crying brought no relief. Victor spared no expense to shield her from pity. The staff were ordered never to whisper around her. No visitors, no flowers, no cards. Everything clean, orderly, controlled. He thought it protected her. In truth, it built walls no one dared breach. Until Caleb. He'd been there barely a day, yet the air had shifted. Della noticed it first. How Lily's eyes followed him. How the girl flinched less when touched. How she murmured when Caleb entered the room. It unsettled the nurses. They made their reports to Victor, carefully worded, fearing his temper. Victor read them in his study, the glass of untouched scotch always at hand. Patient's mood elevated. Increased responsiveness noted. Refuses sedatives. Requests Caleb. Requests. It had been a year since she'd requested anything. That afternoon, Victor entered her sunroom alone. Caleb sat by the window, knees pulled to his chest, watching a stray tabby with mangy fur sunning itself on the sill. The boy turned slightly but said nothing. Victor's gaze settled on Lily. She looked smaller in the pale pink dress Della insisted on, hair loose around her face. But there was color now, a faint blush at her cheeks, and in her lap a battered old toy she hadn't touched in a year. He cleared his throat, feeling ridiculous for needing courage. Lily, he began. She turned to him, no longer a shadow, but something closer to the girl he'd once known. I need to ask you something, Victor said, voice lower than intended. About him. She blinked, waiting. Do you want him here? A pause. Then she nodded. Victor felt the strangest sensation, like falling without moving. I'm not good at this, he admitted, the words foreign in his mouth. I don't know what's right anymore. I only know I'd trade everything I own, if it meant you'd smile again. I need you to understand that. For the first time in 13 months, Lily's lip curved upward. Not a full smile, but the ghost of one. And Victor, who could negotiate billion-dollar mergers without blinking, felt his throat burn. Caleb rose silently, crossed to Lily's side, and without seeking permission took her hand. It fit easily into his, a pale, fragile thing swallowed by sun-darkened fingers. "I'm going to teach her to feel again," Caleb said. But not just in her legs. Victor met his gaze. For the first time, he didn't see a beggar boy. He saw something else, something he didn't have a name for yet. "She deserves a world," Caleb added, "not a room." Victor wanted to argue, to reclaim control, but he didn't, because deep down a truth bloomed painfully in his chest. He'd buried his daughter with his grief long before the accident did. And this boy, this impossible, infuriating boy, was the first person in a year who saw her. Not a patient, not a tragedy, but Lily. He swallowed, nodding stiffly. "Whatever you need," Victor murmured. It wasn't an admission of belief, not yet, but it was a beginning. And for the first time since Camille died, the house felt less like a mausoleum. That night, the mansion felt different. It wasn't the absence of noise. Victor Langston's home had been unnervingly quiet for years. It was the kind of silence that pressed on your ears, thick with unspoken things. But now it hummed, like something invisible beneath the floorboards had begun to stir. Caleb remained in the sunroom after dark, sitting cross-legged on the cold stone tiles. Della left a tray of food near the door and muttered a prayer under her breath as she withdrew. No one else dared approach. Upstairs, Victor poured himself another drink, though he didn't touch it. He sat in Camille's old reading chair, its fabric faded, the scent of her perfume long since faded. The medical reports lay open before him, the verdict of men and women with long titles and longer bills, permanent paraplegia, negligible chance of motor function restoration. Victor closed his eyes. Camille had always believed in things he'd dismissed: old rituals, instinct, the inexplicable kindness of strangers. She would have liked Caleb. She would have made him soup and asked him about the stories behind his bruises. Victor felt Camille's absence like a second skin. Downstairs in the sunroom, Caleb moved to Lily's chair. The girl was awake, her head against the window pane, watching the dark beyond. Street lamps pooled golden light along the empty lawn, their glow too far away to offer warmth. Caleb knelt beside her. "Can you feel this?" he asked, his fingertips brushing the top of her bare foot. She shook her head. A shadow crossed her face. Caleb didn't speak false hope. He didn't say "you will." Instead, he closed his eyes, letting his palm rest against the skin above her ankle. His other hand settled on her knee. The sensation came in slow, soft pulses. Not heat, not electricity. Something older. A resonance. Caleb had no words for it. It was like humming a tune your grandmother once sang to you, a melody buried in blood memory. It wasn't something you learned. It was something you remembered. He focused, drawing the ache from behind his eyes into his palms. Lily's breath hitched. Her fingers clenched the blanket. A flicker, then another. This time, it wasn't just her foot. It was her calf muscle. A faint, stubborn contraction. Lily let out a sharp gasp. "It's okay," Caleb whispered, his voice rough and low. A tear escaped down her cheek. Victor, hearing the sound, was already moving, his footsteps on the stairs, heavy with fear. He burst into the sunroom expecting chaos, pain, or another cruel mirage. Instead, he found Caleb kneeling, his hands steady on Lily's legs. The girl's face was flushed, her lips trembling. She looked alive. Victor's breath caught. Caleb opened his eyes, locking on Victor. "She remembers," the boy said softly. Victor's throat clenched. What does that mean? Her body. It never forgot how to move. It was her mind that stopped asking it to. Victor sagged against the doorway, his legs weak. "This is impossible." Caleb's voice remained calm, stripped of pretense. "Your world is too small. There's more out there than what fits in a contract." Victor wanted to snap back to crush the absurdity of it, but then Lily spoke. "Daddy." It wasn't loud, it wasn't clear, but it shattered him. Victor fell to his knees at her side. "I'm here, baby. I'm here." And for the first time since the accident, Lily reached for him. Not with words, not with tears, but with her hand. Victor's fingers closed around hers, the small, warm grasp anchoring him to a world beyond power, beyond reason. He felt Camille everywhere, and the man who'd conquered cities realized he'd built nothing that mattered. Caleb rose silently. He left them like that, father and daughter, clinging to a future neither believed they could have. Outside, the night smelled of rain. Somewhere distant, a bell rang, and for the first time in a long, long time, the house no longer felt haunted. It felt like memory. The rain came before dawn. A steady silver-gray curtain that hushed the world outside, pooling in gutters and slicking the driveway stones. Inside the mansion, most of the household was still, too afraid to ask questions, too wary of Victor's grief and the strange boy with dirt-smudged cheeks who now slept in the sunroom. Victor hadn't gone to bed. He sat in Lily's room, an armchair dragged beside her bed. She slept without the aid of sedatives, her breathing steady, her small hand still curled loosely around his. He didn't dare move, afraid to disturb what felt like a fragile tether between worlds. It was some time past 3 when Della brought him a blanket and laid it over his shoulders without a word. Victor's lips cracked into something resembling a thank you, though no sound emerged. But he couldn't sleep, not because of what had happened, but because of what he remembered. The memory gnawed at him, a thing with teeth and cold eyes, one he'd kept buried beneath years of deals and numbers and empty toasts at endless charity dinners. He hadn't let himself think of that day since the accident, not in detail, not completely. The accident. The tree had always been Camille's favorite, an old oak in the backyard, older than the house, older than the city records themselves. She called it the Keeper. Lily loved it too, always scrambling up its branches despite Victor's sharp warnings. That day, Victor had been on a call, negotiating a merger that would net him his largest acquisition yet. Camille was away visiting her mother. Lily was supposed to be inside doing her art lesson. He barely noticed when she'd disappeared outside, barely registered the cry. It was the gardener who found her, and Victor, too proud, too frantic, had insisted on carrying her himself, cradling her limp, broken body while yelling for his car. If he'd called the ambulance first, if he hadn't moved her. There was no proof the spinal damage worsened in those minutes. But in his heart, Victor knew. The guilt had rotted him from the inside out. He buried it under money, under rage, under relentless action. And now this boy, this stranger, had walked into his house and cracked the foundation wide open. In the pre-dawn hush, Victor left Lily's side and padded down to the sunroom. Caleb sat by the window, awake. His silhouette was thin, small against the city lights. "You're not sleeping," Victor said, his voice rough. "Neither are you." Victor crossed the room, poured himself a glass of water he didn't want. The silence stretched thick between them. "I know you, boy," Victor muttered. Caleb turned his head, one brow lifting in quiet question. "Not you," Victor said, his jaw tightening. "But your face, or someone's like it years ago, before I was... this." Caleb said nothing, but the set of his shoulders shifted. Victor leaned against the table, memories flooding him. There was a woman. Downtown clinic, run out of a church basement, Camille made me go. Said if I wanted to be a father, I needed to see what life looked like without billion-dollar safety nets. He snorted bitterly. I hated every second of it. Victor's gaze went distant, eyes seeing things long gone. There was a boy, couldn't have been more than 3, had a burn on his hand, no insurance, no papers. The doctor refused him. Caleb's expression tightened. Camille picked him up right there in that waiting room. Said if the clinic wouldn't treat him, we would. Victor's mouth twisted. I tried to stop her. said it wasn't our problem. He swallowed hard. I still see his face sometimes. Big dark eyes. Barefoot. Victor looked at Caleb fully now. That wasn't you, was it? Caleb's gaze held his for a long time. Then, so softly, Victor almost missed it. He nodded. Victor's heart stuttered. I thought you were dead, he whispered. Not dead, Caleb said. Just forgotten. The weight of it dropped like a stone in Victor's gut. All the years, all the moments that could have been different. The child his wife saved. The boy he abandoned. Caleb didn't speak accusation. There was no bitterness in his voice, only truth. Victor's voice cracked. Why? Why come back? Caleb shrugged, his voice carrying the weary wisdom of someone far older than his years. Sometimes broken things find each other. And Victor, the man who'd outbid titans, who'd sent rivals into bankruptcy, who could silence a room with a glance, lowered himself into a chair and buried his face in his hands. For the first time in a decade, he wept, not for the empire, not for the accident, but for all the people he'd failed. And beside him, Caleb said nothing. He simply let the silence hold the pieces of a man long shattered. Outside, dawn broke soft and pale across the horizon. The world impossibly went on. By morning, the mansion felt like a different place. The household staff whispered in corners, their faces tight with something halfway between fear and wonder. No one dared speak the word miracle, but it hung in the air like the scent of rain after a long drought. Something irreversible had cracked open in that house, not just in Lily's fragile body, but in the walls, in the people who had learned to exist inside its suffocating order. Victor Langston woke to the sunlight streaming through the curtains, his head pounding from too little sleep and too many years of silence. When he opened his eyes for a moment, he wasn't sure if he was still dreaming, because there, standing by the window in Lily's room, was his daughter, not in a chair, not in a hospital bed, standing. Victor's heart stopped. Lily clutched the windowsill for balance, her small body trembling, but she was upright. Her knees quivered, her face was pale and damp with sweat, but her eyes were bright, alive in a way they hadn't been in over a year. "Daddy," she whispered, teeth gritted against the strain. Victor was out of the chair in an instant. "Lily, no, baby, don't push. I want to stand," she said through gritted teeth. "I am standing." It wasn't perfect. Her legs bent awkwardly, her balance wobbled, but none of it mattered. It was a movement none of the surgeons, none of the therapy specialists, none of the world's best had believed possible. And here it was. Undeniable, inescapable, alive. Victor dropped to his knees before her, his hands hovering in case she toppled. He didn't touch her. He wouldn't steal the dignity of this moment. Tears blurred his vision. "I'm so proud of you," he said, his voice breaking. "I dreamed I was dancing," she whispered, "and then when I woke up, it was like my legs remembered." Victor swallowed hard. And then Caleb was there, standing in the doorway with the dawn at his back. He looked exhausted, pale, his eyes rimmed with shadows, but there was something fierce and unshaken in him. "She's not done," Caleb murmured. "There's more." Victor rose, wiping his face. "What do you mean?" Caleb stepped forward, his voice low enough the household staff gathered beyond the door wouldn't hear. It wasn't just her legs that stopped working after the accident. It was everything you built around her, the way you shut her world down. Victor opened his mouth to protest but realized he had no defense. Caleb wasn't accusing. He was stating fact. "I can't fix everything," Caleb admitted, his voice soft, raw. "But if you want her whole, it starts with letting the world back in." Victor's throat tightened. "She's been through hell. And so have you," Caleb said. "But the difference is, you built the walls." Victor looked at his daughter, trembling but upright. The boy was right, all the specialists, the endless treatments, the private nurses, the walled-off, disinfected house. He'd turned Lily's life into a mausoleum long before Caleb walked into it. "You did this," Victor said, his voice a mix of awe and shame. "How? What are you?" Caleb shrugged, his eyes oddly ancient. "Just a kid someone left behind once, and someone else picked up. It was too much, too strange." Victor felt a lifetime of certainty unraveling. I don't know how to repay you," Victor confessed. "I didn't ask you to," Caleb said, then gestured toward the windows. "But maybe start by letting her see what's out there again." And Victor, for the first time in longer than he could measure, understood. Not the miracle, not the power, but the mercy, the grace in not questioning why some things happen, only in choosing what you do when they do. He crossed to Lily, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Do you want to go outside?" She nodded, tears streaking down her cheeks. "I want to feel grass again," she whispered. Victor turned to Della. "Open every curtain in this house, throw open the doors." The old housekeeper smiled through her tears. "Yes, sir." The staff scattered like startled birds. Within minutes, the old oak tree in the backyard stood waiting in a wash of soft morning light, and for the first time in 13 months, Lily Langston would feel earth beneath her bare feet. And Victor Langston, the man who had everything but peace, would learn what it meant to kneel in the dirt beside his child and understand that the world owed him nothing. Because sometimes what saves you isn't the miracle you bought. It's the one you almost ignored. And a boy with nothing but calloused hands and a heart that refused to break. By dawn, the Langston estate no longer held its silence. Something had cracked in its walls, in its marble floors, in the high glass windows designed to keep the world at bay. Word of what happened spread fast, not through press releases or public statements, but through whispers, hurried phone calls, and the rare currency of hope. Della was the one who said it first. Over coffee at the kitchen counter, watching Lily asleep in the sunroom, she spoke as though confessing a secret to a ghost. "She needs to walk where people can see her." Victor looked up from his untouched drink. "She's been through enough." "No, sir," Della said, eyes fierce. "Enough was when you locked this house down and told the world she didn't matter anymore. Now she matters. To all of us." It should have started an argument. Victor had always been good at those. But the words fell heavy, and this time he had no shield left to raise. Later that morning, Victor found Caleb in the garden, sitting cross-legged under the old oak. The boy held a faded sky-blue handkerchief in his hands, the initials RC stitched delicately into the corner. Victor recognized it in a heartbeat. Camille had one just like it. She'd gifted it to a young woman at a free clinic 2 decades earlier. A single mother with a quiet smile and a boy clinging to her leg. Caleb caught Victor's gaze and spoke, soft and clear. "Some miracles aren't meant to be hidden behind gates." That was how it began. By noon, Harrington Park, the long-neglected patch of green Camille had fought to protect from developers, was alive again. Not grandly, not with television crews or fanfare, just people. A single Facebook post from a nurse, a text thread between mothers, a pastor with a portable speaker. Families arrived in quiet clusters, children in chairs, teenagers with crutches, old men with canes. And in the center of it all, under the wide branches of the old oak, Caleb laid out his worn towel. The blue handkerchief was tied around his wrist now, bright in the sunlight. Victor arrived last, wheeling Lily through the park with no bodyguards, no entourage. She wore a simple cotton dress, her hair loose around her shoulders. Her eyes, once dull with grief, sparkled as she saw Caleb waiting. No speeches were made. Caleb started as he always did. Warm rice packs, soft stretches, quiet words. But soon other children joined. A boy with cerebral palsy tried to wiggle his toes. A girl missing part of her left arm balanced a tennis ball between her feet. A mother wept openly when her daughter lifted a knee. Victor stood to the side, his old world falling away as a new one took shape before him. He watched his daughter take the first trembling steps beneath that oak tree, and knew, deep in his bones, that this was never meant to be private. This belonged to everyone. The light shifted as afternoon gave way to evening. that late spring glow where the world softens and sharpens at once. The trees cast long shadows over the park, and the hush that settled wasn't one of grief or pity. It was the quiet before a thing you didn't know you'd been waiting for. In the center of Harrington Park, under the wide-armed oak, Lily Langston stood. Caleb knelt in front of her, steadying her knees. Victor crouched behind, his hands hovering near her waist, ready but no longer desperate. Around them, families gathered. No one shouted, no one gave orders. The air felt thin, electric. "You ready?" Caleb asked, voice barely audible. Lily gave a single nod, her jaw set. Caleb glanced back at Victor. "On 3. Victor met the boy's gaze, his heart pounding. "On 3. 1, Caleb whispered, adjusting her legs. 2, Victor steadied her arms, and at 3 they lifted, not carried, not forced, just enough to help her find her center. For a breathless moment, Lily stood. Her legs shook, knees threatening to buckle, but she held. The park stilled. A mother covered her mouth. A boy with a walker stared, unblinking. Caleb stepped back. Victor's hand stayed for a beat, then another. Then he let go, and Lily stood, her lips parted, breath shuddering. She glanced down at her feet, then back up at the old oak, at the faces around her, at Caleb. "I'm standing," she whispered. A single tear traced Victor's cheek. "You're standing." The crowd didn't cheer. It didn't need to. The silence itself was holy. And then, because she was 8 years old and brave and didn't know how to be afraid, Lily took one step. The world didn't stop, but the air thickened. Another step. Victor's hands rose as if to catch her, but Caleb shook his head. "Let her." A third step, slow, unsteady, and then she stumbled forward into Victor's arms, both of them collapsing into laughter, into tears, into something larger than grief. "I told you we'd try," Lily whispered. Caleb smiled, blinking back something that stung his eyes. "And you did." As evening fell, no one left the park. People stayed, sharing food, folding chairs, quiet prayers, old songs. Someone tied a blue handkerchief to the branch of the oak. Another followed, and by nightfall, 30 fluttered in the breeze. Victor stood beneath them, eyes closed, feeling Camille's presence in the way the branches creaked, in the warmth of Della's hand on his shoulder, in the voices of children playing without fear. He turned to Caleb, the boy's face faintly lit by the string lights someone had hung. "You've changed everything," Victor murmured. Caleb didn't reply. He didn't need to. That night the Langston estate gates stayed open, and when morning came, Harrington Park belonged to them all. Weeks later, Harrington Park hummed with life. Sundays became sacred, not for worship in buildings, but for movement in open air. Children who hadn't walked in years sat on blankets, warmed by rice packs and laughter. Parents traded stories. Old men shared blues songs on battered guitars. Victor Langston sold his Manhattan penthouse and donated Camille's estate to fund a new clinic beside the park, the Camille Langston Movement Garden. A bronze plaque sat beneath the oak, for those the world forgot and those who refused to leave. And somewhere, across the city, Caleb moved quietly, showing up in places he was needed, leaving before cameras arrived, his blue handkerchief always visible. When asked his name, he'd only say, "I'm somebody's son," because some stories weren't meant for fame. They were meant to be carried,